in July of 2020, I found myself done and wanting to end it. I had battled for years these feelings and these ideas.
Calls to the VA's Veterans Crisis Line are up more than 10%.
Our number one clinical priority right now is suicide prevention. It is the fear of continued isolation in many of these cases that makes these problems compound themselves, and then we see the effects.
I've been trying to figure out how to make this video. It's not an easy subject to come on here and talk about. I've done this video 5 times now, I think. And each time I sit here and, you know, it runs through me that there are people out there struggling. I see it every day, and the last thing I want is to see another message or read another Instagram post about someone that unfortunately didn't want to reach out for help. And now with all of these alternative options out there, there's so many ways to get help. Putting this out there and being vulnerable may hopefully help someone do the same, and hopefully help someone move forward in their life. The best place to start with this would be 2016. Doubt anyone's gonna watch this. I'm gonna talk about getting out of the Air Force and what a crazy week this has been. So this week I separated from the active duty Air Force with no intention of going in the Guard or Reserves. Being a new veteran is weird. The questions are weird. I wasn't issued the only thing I needed from the Air Force, which was my DD-214. The only thing that I cared about getting. That would trigger a huge chain of events in my life that I think to now has affected the trajectory of my life. When I signed out of the unit, the personnelist there told me to sign a marble notebook and send me on my way. I called a friend of mine who had separated months earlier. He said the same thing. They mailed it to him, and everything was good to go. So I went home and tried to start my new life.
There's a lot of leadership and a lot of people within that are not putting the mission and the people first. So all these suicides and a lot of these issues are preventable from within. These people are overworked. They're stressed beyond belief. I had to look at my life goals and what I wanted to accomplish, and kind of make that move and separate from the military. So to get off of that negative subject, which I definitely want to work on, you know, solutions for. And
my plan getting out of the military was to go be a military contractor. I couldn't do that without my DD-214. So that began a difficult road of trying to get it so that I could start doing the work I wanted to do, or the work I thought I wanted to do. I had to really become reliant on myself and try to figure out how to troubleshoot. While doing that, I was dumping all of my energy into fitness, specifically competitive CrossFit, thinking that that was the way for me to kind of mask my emotions, shove things down that I'd been just fighting for years, and just kind of push on, while also trying to get my DD-214. And that kept falling on deaf ears. Finally reached out to at that point, senior NCO, who had helped me earlier in my Air Force career. And she fortunately looked into it for me and saw that one was never generated. Well, that was an uphill battle. I had to get my congressperson involved, and after close to a year, I finally got my DD-214. I had already secured a job, fortunately. I was actually teaching some of the same stuff I taught while in the Air Force. That was a good thing. You know, I got to kind of contribute and give back to the community. As this progressed, I found myself struggling with purpose. I noticed increasingly myself having mental health issues. I began to look to ways to help myself, ways to hopefully find healthcare options. I was having chronic physical pain, a lot of just burned relationships, not trusting people, and just constantly being bitter. I finally looked to therapy as an option, and the only way I could get therapy at the time was through a nonprofit. So I attempted everything I could, whether it was self-help books, journaling, meditation. I began down this road where I was getting to a better place, but I was still not hitting the root of whatever was there and what was going on. I fortunately found myself doing a creative outlet full-time. And this took place through CrossFit when I was offered to shoot photos of an event. I began shooting anything and everything I could. I dumped every bit of energy, even when things were tough, into it. And for a while, it definitely masked what was going on. In 2018, I met my friend Rory Hamill, and we hit it off instantly. We kept in touch, and I asked Rory if he'd want to be featured in a documentary I planned to submit. I thought his story and his way of battling and giving back while also taking accountability for himself and his physical health would be a way to also help me with my mental and physical health. We released a documentary. The day after, we were told by someone that it had saved their life, and that was a massive win. The beginning of 2020, we all know, the world changed.
Fast-breaking developments in the coronavirus emergency in the U.S. and around the world. New Jersey today becoming the 6th state to close.
May 1st, 2020, Rory took his own life. Myself and another friend were at the house when Rory was brought out.
And with the pandemic, veterans are increasingly feeling isolated. Veterans like Rory Hamill. He was a father of 3 and a decorated combat veteran in the Marines. Hamill lost his life not at war, but by suicide at home.
I found myself isolating. I was stuck in a pretty volatile home situation at the time, at my lowest, engulfed by my mental health and just deteriorating worldview. And ultimately, I found myself at a point where I was ready to say goodbye. I remember saying goodbye to my dog and my parents and leaving their house for what I thought was the last time. Had my plan, everything was set in motion, and then there were people where I thought was the spot, and I didn't want to mess their day up. So I kind of had my whole plan shaken up. And then, as crazy as it sounds, later that night, while I was trying to figure out what to do, a Philadelphia parking attendant happened to stumble upon me walking back to my vehicle, which I thought had a ticket. And I looked at them and was like, really? And they looked at me and said, you're good. And for whatever reason, that saved my life. It snapped me out of the spiral I was on. I like to use the term, it broke the cycle. And from that point forward, I knew I wanted to live. I started looking for mental health resources. I got an apartment. It wasn't an easy road, but I knew that I had to put in the work. Weeks later, I got that ticket in the mail. That, I think it was like $42, was the best $42 I've ever spent. So by April 2021, I'd relocated to Florida. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew because of what was going on in the world and where I was that I needed to make a change. So I took the chance. It by no means was an easy road, and I dealt with a lot of hurdles that put me in a place of isolation and just still being in a jaded mindset while still trying to simultaneously heal myself. I look back on that period, and by no means am I necessarily happy with where I was and who I was as a person, but I know I did everything to the best of my ability. And in April of 2021, I found myself on a shoot about 6 hours away from home, sitting in the back of a Black Hawk, not knowing where I was or what I was doing. I felt like I was literally watching myself from a drone. I drove home about 6 hours. I had no recollection of the drive. I couldn't shake the feeling of it. I went to work after getting home, and I was sitting in the staff meeting, and my boss sends everyone out of the conference room, and he looks at me and he's like, "Hey, are you here? What's going on?" I just broke down. The night prior, I talked to my best friend, explained the situation, that I didn't know what to do, how to fix it. I'm sitting at work, just bawling my eyes out, not knowing what to do. And my boss at the time sent me home. I drove straight to the VA, and I told them I needed help. They said they didn't have any mental health providers at the satellite location where I was registered. They then proceeded to draw labs, give me an EKG, take me to a treatment room, and the provider came in. The provider I looked to for help and support came in and instead met me with disbelief and skepticism, telling me that I was a photographer and what could be so stressful in my life and that nothing was wrong with me. Obviously very frustrated. I talked to the nurse. I believe I filed a complaint at the time.
The return to civilian life can be difficult. The number of vets struggling with depression, anxiety, and PTSD has risen dramatically in the last few decades.
The VA has continued to let me down.
Public records request about wait times in the Bay Area's 2 VA systems was flagged and potentially delayed.
They said that they were going to discharge me. So I went home, I got my stuff in case I had to stay overnight, drove straight to the ER, and I sat and I waited. So hours went by and they finally get me back. They start doing labs, and then the nurse asked me if I thought I was having any symptoms of a stroke. Being 30 years old at the time, I was terrified. They didn't see anything that would have been identified as a stroke. Finally, a doctor comes in. He asks me if I had ever been diagnosed with PTSD or depression. I answered yes, I had been. We discussed it further, and he explained I was having depersonalization disorder. I went home at about 5:30 in the morning, sat on the couch, and that day I talked to my best friend. We reached out to Jesse, the founder of Heroic Arts Project. We explained the situation to Jesse. Jesse and I spoke pretty in depth about it. I had seen the effects of ketamine when given to patients, and we both kind of fell on ketamine-assisted therapy, which I had previously been very skeptical on. I had to really do my due diligence. I had to make sure that I had the time and kind of figure out what the best course of action for me would be. I met with Jesse. I spoke to Jared, an integration coach at Heroic Arts, who would be guiding me through every step of the way and meeting with me pre and post infusion. The biggest things for me in all this were using ketamine to help me work through past trauma, whether from childhood or the military or post-military, that were putting me in this place that I couldn't tap into any of the tools or any of these kind of ideas that I had on who I was, how to operate and navigate through all these challenges and obstacles that we face in life. Each session, I would set an intention. Through the course of 8 infusions, I was working on something specific. It tapped into these different experiences or these troubles that I was facing and allowed me to navigate how I would operate through those environments now, or how I would maybe change my reaction to something that previously would have been a huge deal for me, versus now being able to take that in stride and carry it over and be a better person because of it, or not letting very small things take hold of my life. The big things I looked at when looking at treatment options were the fact that I didn't want to utilize SSRIs, SNRIs, or any type of medications that would really cause long-term issues. A lot of the research out there in the world shows that, unfortunately, those medications are leading people to actually have a lot of the issues that I was trying to beat. So for me personally, I decided to opt for an alternative. A lot of the research now shows that up to 70% of the people utilizing ketamine for treatment-resistant depression are actually seeing great results from it. And while it may not be an absolute cure, being able to feel better and navigate those problems long-term was the absolute best case scenario for me. 50 to 60% of PTSD treatments are showing promising results with the use of ketamine as well. There are a lot of hopes for people utilizing these treatments now. In conjunction with various other forms of alternative medicine, the biggest options now weren't even a thought 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's really great that organizations like Heroic Hearts Project, people like Jesse, like Jared, like my good friend Dr. Kate Pate, are putting this work in and trying to help folks grow and heal post-service. This doesn't just necessarily go for veterans. There are tons of organizations like MAPS working hand in hand with Heroic Hearts Project, people like Rick Doblin, who've been on the forefront of research, also in legislation change on the use of psychedelic assisted therapy. So there's a ton of options out there. At the end of the day, none of us are alone. We all have options, but it's up to us. We have to be accountable to ourselves. We have to look within ourselves and figure out which ways we need to navigate. You can ask for help. I'm a product of that. I've taken every possible step. I've battled red tape, the hurdles, and dealt with all of this. So I know that if I can manage it, then you can too. It's not an easy subject to come on here and talk about. I've done this video 5 times now, I think. And each time I sit here and, you know, it runs through me that there are people out there struggling. I see it every day, and the last thing I want is to see another message or read another Instagram post about someone that unfortunately didn't want to reach out for help. And now with all of these alternative options out there, there's so many ways to get help. So please, I encourage you, if you're struggling, please reach out to someone. If you're a veteran, look to Heroic Hearts, look to any of these resources that we have out there, including the VA. Get yourself help, and at the end of the day, just realize that you are loved and that you are worth it. So please, you know, keep fighting, and just know that I'm a product of this as well. So if I can do it, you definitely can. Thanks.